I'm not the kind of person who believes in rules without reasons. If someone tells me to stay away from something, I need to know why. That's just who I am. Call it curiosity. Call it stubbornness. My mother used to call it a curse. She would grab my wrist when I was small and say, "Nolan, one day that head of yours is going to walk you somewhere your legs can't bring you back from." I always laughed it off. I'm not laughing anymore. I moved into Halloway Residences in early October, one of those old money apartment towers that looks beautiful from the outside and slightly wrong on the inside. You know the type. High ceilings, marble lobbies that echo too much, elevators that take just a second too long to arrive, as if they're deciding whether to let you in. The building had 12 floors. I was on the 9th. On my first day, the property manager, a tired-looking man named Mr. Ferris with ink-stained fingers and a permanent squint, handed me a single sheet of paper along with my keys. It was a list of building rules. Basic stuff. No smoking in hallways. Trash on Tuesdays and Fridays. No guests after 11 p.m. without prior notice. Standard apartment living. I skimmed it the way you skim anything you don't think matters. And at the very bottom, printed in a slightly different font, like it had been added later by someone else entirely, was this line: "Floor 7 is closed for maintenance. Do not attempt to access it. Do not exit the elevator on floor 7 under any circumstances." I looked up at Mr. Ferris. Maintenance? For how long? He didn't blink. A while. Like months. Years. I laughed a little. He didn't. He folded my copy of the rules, pressed it into my hand, and walked away before I could ask anything else. I stood in the lobby holding my keys and a feeling I couldn't name yet. Something between curiosity and the first, faint edge of unease. I tucked it away. I had boxes to unpack. The first 2 weeks were completely normal. I settled in, learned the rhythms of the building. The couple on the 8th floor who argued every Sunday evening, always about money, always ending in silence. The elderly woman on the 3rd who always smelled of lavender and nodded without ever speaking a word. The elevator that made a low grinding noise between the 6th and 8th floors, always skipping the 7th, as if it had learned to, as if it had been trained. I started noticing things about the 7th floor from the outside. If you stood in the lobby and looked up the elevator shaft through the narrow gap in the doors, you could count the faint strips of light from each floor's lobby. Every floor had one, except the 7th. The 7th was dark no matter the time of day. I told myself the lights had simply burned out. Maintenance hadn't gotten around to replacing them. It was a reasonable explanation. I was good at reasonable explanations back then. The elevator panel had a 7 button. It wasn't removed, wasn't taped over, wasn't covered with a sign. It was just there, slightly duller than the others, like it had simply never been pressed. I tried pressing it once on a quiet afternoon, out of idle curiosity. Nothing happened. The elevator continued to the 8th floor as if I had touched nothing at all. I told myself it was a mechanical bypass, a locked-out floor, completely normal. I almost believed it. But one night, maybe 3 weeks in, I came home late from work. It was past midnight. The lobby was empty, the lights at half dim, and when I stepped into the elevator and pressed 9, something happened that had never happened before. The elevator stopped at floor 7. The doors opened. I stood completely still. The hallway beyond was dark. Not dim, not shadowed, but absolute dark. The kind of dark that doesn't feel like the absence of light. It feels like the presence of something else. Something patient. I could smell it too: old wood, dampness, and beneath that something sweeter. Wrong sweet. Like fruit left too long in a warm room. Fermenting rather than rotting. filling the air with something almost pleasant and deeply wrong at the same time. I didn't move. The doors stayed open for what felt like a full minute, though it was probably 10 seconds. Then they began to close on their own, slowly, as if they too were reluctant. I let them. My heart was hammering by the time I reached the 9th floor. I stood in the hallway outside my apartment for a long time before I could make myself unlock the door. That night, I slept with every light in the apartment on. I should have left it there. I should have gone to Mr. Ferris the next morning and said exactly what happened and asked him again. Really asked him why that floor was sealed. Instead, I did the thing I always do. I waited. I watched. I talked myself into going back. 3 evenings later, I stood in the elevator with my hand hovering over the panel. The rule was printed clearly in my mind. But the door had opened. The floor was real. And nobody had ever given me a real reason. I pressed 7. The elevator descended 1 floor and stopped. The doors opened, and this time it was different. There was light. Not much. A single flickering bulb somewhere deep in the hallway, casting yellow light in short, stuttering pulses like a heartbeat struggling to maintain rhythm. The hallway looked identical to mine. Same width, same faded carpet pattern, same numbered doors stretching in both directions. Except every door was closed, and every door had a thin dark line running horizontally across it at about chest height. Not a crack, not damage, a line. Deliberate, even as if drawn by the same hand on every door at the same moment in time. I stepped out. The carpet absorbed my footsteps completely. That was the first thing that felt wrong, the silence. My floor had ambient sound always. Pipes working, ventilation humming, the distant murmur of televisions and lives being lived. Floor 7 had nothing. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was held, like a room full of people who have all stopped breathing at the same moment because they heard something they weren't supposed to. I walked slowly toward the nearest door. 701. I raised my hand to knock and stopped because I heard something from inside. Breathing. Slow, steady, and completely aware. Not the breathing of someone sleeping. Not the unconscious rhythm of rest. This was the breathing of something sitting very still in the dark on the other side of that door, listening back at me with the same attention I was giving it. Equal. Patient. Waiting to see what I would do next. My hand dropped on its own. My body understood something my mind was still working through. I took 1 step back, then another. I kept my eyes on the doors as I moved, all of them, not just 701, because I had the sudden, overwhelming sense that looking away was some kind of signal. Permission. An invitation I did not want to extend. I reached the elevator and pressed the button. It opened immediately, as if it had never left, as if it had been holding the doors just out of sight, waiting for me to come back. I stepped inside. The doors closed. As the elevator rose, I heard it. From below, muffled, passing through floors and walls and the bones of the building itself. A sound. Not a scream. Not a crash. A voice. A single voice, speaking too low to make out words, at a frequency that sat just beneath the edge of meaning. The kind of sound that doesn't frighten you in the moment. It frightens you 2 hours later, lying in the dark, when you finally understand what you heard. Over the next 4 days, small things began to change. A neighbor I'd greeted every morning, a young man named Daniel, mid-20s, always carrying the same green thermos, stopped appearing. His door stayed shut. I knocked once on the 2nd day, then again on the 3rd. No answer. I asked the woman on the 3rd floor if she'd seen him. She looked at me for a long moment and then said, quietly, "Which floor did you say he lived on?" When I told her, she nodded once and walked back into her apartment without another word. I started sleeping badly. Not nightmares exactly. More like awareness. I would wake at 3 a.m. with the absolute certainty that something in my apartment had shifted while I slept. A chair turned slightly. A window latch I clearly remembered securing now standing open half an inch. Small adjustments. Changes precise enough to make you question your own memory rather than the world around you. I checked the building's shared security app and pulled up the elevator footage from the night I'd first visited floor 7. The footage showed me entering, pressing a button, and riding to the 9th floor without stopping. Uninterrupted. No pause at floor 7. No doors opening into darkness. The camera had recorded a version of that night that hadn't happened, or had carefully hidden the version that had. I went to Mr. Ferris the next morning. He was behind his desk, same squint, same stained fingers. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, without reacting, and when I finished he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "How many doors did you pass?" I told him 4 or 5. I stopped at 701. Something shifted behind his eyes. "Did you touch the door?" "No," I said. "I almost knocked, but I stopped." He exhaled slowly, the way a person does when they've just heard news that could have been worse. "Good," he said. He stood and moved to his filing cabinet. The rule exists because some floors don't want maintenance. They want witnesses. And a witness who knocks becomes something else. He set a folder on the desk and sat back down. "What happened to the people who used to live there?" I asked. He looked at me. "Nobody lives there." Pause, measured and deliberate. "Anymore." I moved out 6 weeks later. I told the new tenants nothing. I still don't know if that makes me a coward or a mercy. I've thought about floor 7 nearly every day since leaving. Not with fear exactly. More like that feeling you get when you almost step into traffic and only realize it once you're safe on the curb. That retroactive cold. That understanding of how thin the distance is between what happened and what could have. I almost knocked on that door. I was a single second away from it. Sometimes, in that space between waking and sleeping where the mind is honest whether you want it to be or not, I imagine what would have happened if I had knocked. And the strange thing is, I don't imagine the door opening. I don't imagine a figure standing in the dark. I imagine the breathing simply continuing, unchanged, and then, slowly, softly, the sound of a latch turning on my side of the door. From the inside. Some rules aren't there to keep a floor empty. They're there to keep you from finding out it was never empty to begin with. I check my door latches every night now. Both sides. Just to be sure.